The night air was bitter, sharp enough to cut through bone. Smoke from dying campfires clung to the valley like a shroud, curling in slow ribbons that carried the scent of ash and despair. Elias sat alone, knees drawn to his chest, wrapped in the only thing he owned in this world, a tattered wool blanket that smelled of dust and rain. It wasn't much, but it was his. A relic from a family he barely remembered, a life long buried. He had learned to keep to the edges of things: towns, roads, men's eyes. Children without fathers were not welcome in the ranching towns, and those without mothers were treated even worse. The blanket was the last tether he had to belonging, and sometimes, when the cold was unbearable, he imagined it was his mother's arms around him. That night, however, the silence broke. From the shadows at the edge of his meager firelight, a figure stumbled forward. A woman, her hair loose and wild, her clothes torn, her eyes reflecting firelight with a fevered desperation. She collapsed just beyond the circle of warmth, her breathing ragged, her hands bloodied from a journey too long for a body too fragile. Elias froze. Strangers meant danger, and he had spent his short life avoiding both. But something in the way she curled into herself, shivering violently, silenced his instinct to run. The boy's stomach twisted. He had nothing, no food, no coin, no home to offer. Only the blanket. He looked down at it, then back at the stranger. She was trembling, whispering words he couldn't understand. Her lips moved like broken prayers. Elias clenched the blanket tighter. To give it away meant facing the night's bite with bare skin, with nothing but resolve to keep him alive. But to hold it meant watching another freeze before his eyes. And so, with hands that shook almost as much as hers, Elias loosened the wool from his shoulders and draped it over her. The woman gasped as the warmth enveloped her, and for a moment, her wild eyes softened, focusing on him as though she saw not a ragged orphan, but something more. "Why?" she whispered. Elias didn't answer. He didn't know how. He simply sat back, arms around himself, letting the cold eat into his bones. He could feel it already gnawing, merciless, like teeth sinking into his skin. Yet when he saw her breathing steady, when her shivering slowed, a strange warmth settled in his chest. It wasn't comfort exactly. It was something older, heavier. The fire crackled low. He added the last of his sticks, watching the flames struggle against the night. Above them, the stars were merciless, staring down with icy indifference. He thought of the stories his mother once told him before she was gone, of spirits that walk the earth in human form, testing the kindness of those they met. Fail them, and misfortune would cling to you like a curse. Show mercy, and blessings might follow, though never in the way one expected. The woman stirred in her sleep, whispering words in a tongue Elias did not know. He leaned closer. It wasn't English. It wasn't the drunken slurs of the cattlemen in town. It was softer, melodic, like a song half remembered. He pulled back quickly, unsure what it meant, unsure if he should have given his blanket at all. Doubt crept in like the cold, but it was too late now. Hours passed. The fire died to embers. Elias wrapped his thin arms around himself, shivering violently, every breath visible in the night air. His eyelids sagged heavy with exhaustion. He had given everything he owned to a stranger, and now he wondered if he'd see morning at all. But just before sleep claimed him, just before his body surrendered to the cold, he felt something brush against his shoulder. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't her hands. It was lighter, softer, like the brush of a feather. He opened his eyes, heart hammering. For an instant, in the half-light of dying embers, he thought he saw something towering behind her, a shape draped in feathers, crowned in shadow, eyes gleaming like coals. Then it was gone, vanished as though it had never been. He told himself it was the cold playing tricks on his mind. Yet, deep inside, Elias knew. Something had taken notice. Something had shifted in the dark. When dawn finally broke, the woman stirred and sat upright, clutching the blanket tight around her shoulders. Her gaze found Elias, and her eyes were no longer wild but steady, piercing, carrying a depth he couldn't understand. She studied him for a long moment, then rose with surprising strength, pulling the wool tighter around herself. "You'll be remembered," she said softly. Then she walked away, vanishing into the morning mist, leaving Elias trembling, alone, and without the one thing he had ever called his own. The valley woke slow, its silence broken by crows and the distant lowing of cattle. Elias dragged himself upright, every muscle aching, every breath sharp in his chest. He had survived the night, though barely, and the absence of the blanket left his skin raw against the morning air. The woman was gone, vanished without a footprint to follow, yet her presence lingered like a shadow at the edges of his thoughts. He stumbled to his feet and pressed his hands against the fading warmth of the earth where she had lain. The ground seemed strangely alive, pulsing faintly beneath his fingers, as though the dirt itself remembered her weight. Elias pulled back quickly, unsettled. He told himself it was foolish to dwell on it. She was just a woman, lost and desperate, nothing more. And yet, something in the way she had looked at him, the steadiness of her gaze at dawn, haunted him. By noon, Elias reached the outskirts of town. The main street was alive with dust and noise wagon wheels creaking, boots stomping, the hiss of blacksmith fires. He moved like a ghost between them, invisible except when noticed, and then only as an annoyance. A shopkeeper shooed him away with a broom when he lingered too close. A group of boys threw a stone that grazed his shoulder, laughing when he flinched. He kept walking. He had grown used to cruelty, but that day was different. As he passed the livery, something unexpected caught his eye. A small group of riders had gathered, and among them were men unlike the usual ranch hands. Their clothes were embroidered with patterns of feathers, their hair braided and adorned with beads that gleamed in the sunlight. They spoke little, but their presence turned heads. Townsfolk whispered, some in fear, others in reverence. Elias paused, hidden in the doorway of a shuttered store. One of the riders dismounted and lifted his face to the wind, as though searching for something unseen. His eyes scanned the street, and for one terrifying moment, they locked with Elias's. The boy froze, unable to breathe, but the man did not frown. Instead, he inclined his head slowly, as though acknowledging something Elias could not understand. Then he turned back to his companions. The whispers grew louder. Feather crowns, someone muttered. Elias had heard of them, in fragments and stories. A people who lived beyond the ridge, where the land sloped into shadowed forests. They were said to wear feathers as marks of honor, each plume earned through sacrifice or courage. Children in town whispered that to cross them meant curses, but others said they were guardians, bound to old ways no one dared to name aloud. Elias should have turned away. Instead, he lingered, curiosity rooting him to the spot. That night, unable to shake the pull in his chest, Elias left town again. He wandered back into the valley, his stomach hollow, his arms still aching from the cold of the night before. The moon rose, silvering the land, and once again, the world grew still. It was then he heard it drums. Soft at first, distant, then louder, carried by the wind like a heartbeat. He followed, through brush, across the dry bed of a creek, into the thickening trees. The sound grew until it wrapped around him, steady and unyielding. And then, through the branches, he saw them. Dozens of figures gathered in a clearing, firelight painting their faces gold and red. They moved in rhythm, steps slow, deliberate, feathers woven into their hair, catching sparks of light. At the center stood the riders he had glimpsed in town, and among them, the man whose eyes had found his earlier. Elias crouched low, heart racing. He should not be here, he knew it. Yet something stronger than fear held him. The drums ceased. Silence rippled through the gathering. Then, from the shadows, a woman emerged. Her face was painted, her cloak heavy with feathers that gleamed in shades of raven black and snowy white. She carried herself with the weight of someone beyond mortal years. When she spoke, her voice carried across the clearing like wind through hollow stone. "There is one among us who showed mercy," she said. The crowd murmured, heads turning, eyes scanning. Elias's blood turned to ice. Somehow, impossibly, she meant him. The woman lifted her hand. And to Elias's horror, the stranger he had given his blanket to stepped forward from the crowd. She was changed, her hair braided with feathers, her torn clothes replaced with garments that shimmered in the firelight. She looked nothing like the half-dead wanderer he had saved. She looked like she had always belonged here, among them. Her eyes found his hiding place at once. No hesitation, no searching. She knew exactly where he crouched, and she raised her arm to point. "There," she said. 100 faces turned. Elias's breath caught. He wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him. The man who had bowed his head in town stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he gestured for Elias to approach. The boy staggered out, trembling, every step feeling like the drop into an abyss. He expected anger, punishment, exile. But instead, as he reached the circle, the drums began again, soft, steady, like the beat of his racing heart. The painted woman nodded once, and 2 men stepped forward, carrying something between them. A headdress, woven from feathers of every color: black, white, brown, red, blue. It shimmered in the firelight, alive, as though each plume carried breath within it. Elias's knees weakened. He could not look away. "Mercy is the crown of the forgotten," the woman intoned. This boy gave all he had to one who asked for nothing. Such sacrifice does not go unseen. Before Elias could protest, before he could insist he was no one, they placed the headdress upon his brow. The weight of it pressed into him, yet instead of crushing, it steadied him. For the first time in his life, he did not feel small. He felt chosen. The crowd bowed their heads. The drums thundered. The fire roared high. And Elias, the orphan who had owned nothing, now stood crowned in feathers beneath the gaze of 100 watchful eyes. The firelight blurred into smoke, into shadows that twisted at the edges of Elias's vision. The headdress sat heavy upon his brow, every feather a burden he did not yet understand. The crowd's voices rose in unison, not chanting his name, not calling him a savior, but something older in ancient rhythm, words woven with the heartbeat of the drums. Elias could not comprehend them, yet they reverberated through his bones, shaking something loose inside him that had been bound for years. He wanted to tear the feathers off, to insist he was no more than a boy, no more than an orphan who had given away his only blanket. But when he touched the crown, it pulsed with warmth, as though it breathed. The painted woman stepped closer, her eyes sharp as obsidian, her face unreadable beneath the swirls of white across her cheeks. "Do you know what you carry?" she asked. Elias shook his head, unable to speak. "You carry the weight of mercy," she said. "And mercy is heavier than iron. It cannot be bought, it cannot be stolen. It can only be given freely, and you gave it when no one else would. That is why the feathers answer you." The crowd murmured in approval, their faces softening. But Elias's heart beat hard with confusion. He was no leader. He had no wisdom, no strength. He had spent his life running from hunger, from fists, from the cold. What did he know of crowns? The woman lifted her hand, and the stranger, the one who had worn his blanket, stepped forward again. She seemed taller now, her bearing regal, her eyes burning with recognition. She bowed slightly before Elias, not in mockery, but in respect. "This boy gave me warmth when the night would have taken me," she said. "In giving, he lost everything. He has no blanket, no home, no kin. Yet he gave. That is the mark of one chosen." The crowd stirred again, and the drums struck harder. Elias's throat tightened. He had expected to vanish, to fade into dust like always. But instead, the world's gaze had turned upon him, and it terrified him. The painted woman placed her hand on his shoulder. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Do not run from it. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is fire it spreads. It burns away cruelty, and it leaves only truth behind." Elias tried to steady his breathing, but the feathers weighed more heavily with each word. He could not escape the memory of cold nights, of stones thrown by cruel hands, of hunger gnawing his belly. Mercy had never protected him before. Mercy had only left him weaker. Yet, as if sensing his doubt, the crowd parted. An elder stepped forward, his hair silver, his back bent with years. He placed something in Elias's hands, a carved wooden staff, etched with patterns of wings and talons. "Every crown must be born with a staff," the elder said. "It is not for striking, but for carrying. You will carry what others cannot." The staff was lighter than it looked, yet solid, humming with the same strange warmth as the feathers. Elias gripped it tight, and for the first time, the weight upon his brow seemed to balance. The night stretched long. They sang, they danced, they told stories Elias could not follow. But always, their eyes returned to him, the orphan crowned not by bloodline or conquest, but by a single act of kindness. When dawn broke again, painting the sky in pale gold, the ceremony ended. The crowd dispersed like mist, fading back into forest and valley. Only the painted woman remained, and the stranger beside her. "You will not walk as you did before," the woman said. "You carry us now, and we carry you. The feathers will remind you when you forget." Elias touched the crown lightly. He wanted to ask what it meant, what he was supposed to do. But when he opened his mouth, the words died. Some truths could not be spoken. They had to be lived. The woman smiled faintly, almost sad. Mercy is a gift, child, but it is also a burden. When you give it, you change the world, but the world will not always thank you. With that, she and the stranger turned, vanishing into the dawn mist. Elias was left alone in the clearing, the feathers bright against the morning sun, the staff steady in his hands. For the first time, he did not feel invisible. For the first time, the emptiness inside him was filled not with certainty, but with something stronger, responsibility. He looked down at the dirt, at the prints of dozens of feet now fading, and realized something strange. He was no longer the boy clinging to scraps at the edge of fires. He was something else, something unchosen yet undeniable. The world had seen him. The feathers had crowned him, and dawn had made it so. The orphan gave the only thing he had, and the world answered with more than he ever imagined. His story reminds us that true power does not come from wealth or strength or lineage. It comes from mercy, from choosing to give when you have nothing left. And so I ask you, what would you give if it meant saving someone else? Would you part with your last comfort, your only possession, to ease another's suffering? Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can crown you with something greater than kingship, greater than power, something eternal. This is the story of mercy and feathers. If this tale moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, carry it forward, because you never know whose life you might change with the blanket you give away.